Hi, my name's Nicola Arkinstall. I'm the Director of Staffordshire Research School, and we are the mobilisation arm of the EEF. Hopefully you may have heard of the Education Endowment Foundation. And our aim is to really support schools to understand the latest research and the effective research that shows what are the most effective strategies to use in schools. As the EEF, we obviously generate research through the trials, we synthesize that into guidance reports, but the research schools get into schools, do activities like this, do sessions, do training, and really help teachers to understand what the research says and how they can apply that in their classroom. So I work 2 days a week for the research school in Staffordshire, and then 3 days a week I'm a school leader in Birmingham in a primary school. So I'm doing it day to day as well in my schools. But thank you so much for joining me. And I know you've had a busy day at school, but I really do hope you find this session useful. And I'm very excited to be able to share with you the new EEF implementation guidance report. And this really is a fantastic resource for any school leader in schools who is looking to make changes, improvements in their subject, in their phase, in their area, in the whole school, in their mat. So I think it works at every level to think about what does the research tell us about when we want to make some changes, when we want to make improvements, how can we do that in the most effective way that actually changes practice in classrooms and makes a difference for the pupils in our classrooms. And we can only do that by implementing things in an effective way. So this new guidance report has been 2 years in the making, so I'm really excited to be able to share it with you. And I think if you're aware of the old guidance report, if you did an MPQ, then this is really an uplift on that. And it is really about how we do it in a quality way. I have created a Padlet for you. So if you scan that QR code or go to that website, it's got all the research resources on there from the new guidance report. It's got the appendices, the tools that go with it, and it's also got the research that goes behind the report on there for you. And it's got a little workbook in there that you may want to use with your teams that just give you some guiding reflection questions to review your current practice, because this isn't really anything magical or anything different. And I'm sure, hopefully, this will just give you the confidence that you are doing the right things, but also it will give you the ability to reflect on which of these things are we doing well at the moment and are we doing in a quality way, and which of these things might we need to improve or tweak. And that workbook on the Padlet hopefully will help give you those questions, and we will do that this afternoon, show you some of those questions that help you reflect on that. I will ask you to put some good ideas in the chat. If I give you the recommendation and you've got something that's working really well in your school or in your, in your leadership or in your phase, please do type it in the chat, because that's what it's about. It's learning from each other about what's working well in our settings. So I'll get on to the report. So Becky Francis is our CEO for the EEF. And this, I'll just let you read this quote from the guidance report. And it really is about that effective implementation has that critical role to play in schools to make that change for all pupils, but specifically, again, especially for our disadvantaged pupils. And I think there's been a real shift in the English education system where we want to engage with education, with research, with educational research. But awareness of research doesn't actually make improved outcomes. It doesn't actually change into practices in our classroom. So implementation is crucial for turning that interest and engagement into those tangible changes in school that make a difference to pupils. And it's really about weaving that evidence into our everyday practice. So the old report looked like that, and it really did help school leaders to think about a shared language of implementation. It gave a process of explore, prepare, deliver and sustain, but it missed out a really big part. Okay, so it hit the mark in terms of helping us to think about implementation. It really told us to only do a few things well rather than trying to do too many things and not in quality. But actually this update is a really fantastic resource that uplifts how to do it well. Okay, and what it missed the point with was the fact that actually implementation is fundamentally a collaborative and a social process, and it's driven by people, and it's driven by the people we work with, and it's driven by how they think, how they behave, and how they interact. And people were a massive chunk that were missing out of that old report in terms of how do we, okay, we've got this brilliant plan of implementation, but actually how do I get the people I'm working with make those changes in their classroom, and make a difference. So I'm really pleased that this, you know, what we started was going to be a few tweaks to the report, actually changed in a shift of how we think about implementation. And how we think about implementation is about, you know, it's how do we make a change with people, and how do we work with people to enable that change. This new research, this new guidance report that's available for everyone is really robust. Research underpins it. As far as we know, it's the biggest review of research into school implementation. There were 3,373 studies fully screened, 34 implementation strategies, and there were lots and lots of things like focus groups, surveys as well, that really underpin this guidance. So we know how implementation works, who it works for, and how and why it works. And I think that's the good thing about the EEF, is that what school leader has got time to read that amount of research, but they synthesize that into a palatable document that actually is user-friendly and is readable and actually makes sense to busy school leaders. So this is the resulting recommendations from all of that research. There are now 3 recommendations. The first one is around the behaviours, and that really is the beating heart of the guidance report, that if we want to in that change, we really need to adopt the behaviours that drive that effective implementation. And those behaviours are, we need to engage with colleagues and staff and the school community so that they can shape what happens, but also as the leader, providing that overall direction. And I will talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. I know it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour this evening, but hopefully I'll give you enough of an understanding of the recommendations so that you can then drill down into the one you feel would most benefit your practice or your school or your organisation. The second behaviour is we need to unite our colleagues, and we need to unite our stakeholders in our school around what is being implemented, how it will be implemented, and that why are we doing this? Why is that change important, and why does it matter to our school and to our pupils? And then also we need to adopt the behaviour of reflectiveness. We need to be able to monitor, not for a punitive measure, but actually monitor so we can give that support to people and adapt and improve that implementation and check that, you know, what's going on is having an impact on the pupils. The second recommendation is about the contextual factors that are needed for effective implementation. So it's, what are we implementing? Have we got the systems and structures in place, the capacity to actually do this? You know, have we got the time, the roles, the logistics? Because if you get those behaviours and you really get people engaged or united, you'll get real frustration if then people can't actually put that in place because they haven't got the time or capacity to do that. So when we are thinking of making changes, it's really thinking of, have we got that capacity, and how can we build the capacity for that to happen? And also, have we got the people who can enable that change, who can support us and lead it and positively influence that implementation? And then the third recommendation gives us a process, and this will be familiar to people who knew the old guidance report. It's that structured process of exploring, preparing, delivering and sustaining. But there are a few tweaks to that process that again uplift it and make it a more of a quality process. So I'm going to drill down into each of these recommendations now. Okay, so the first one, and like I said, this really is that beating heart of the report, is to adopt those behaviours that drive effective implementation. And these 3 cross-cutting behaviours really get to the heart of what drives that effective implementation. And these behaviours should feature across all implementation strategies and actions. So it's not a case of, oh, engage, tick, I've done that, I'll move on. It's thinking all the way through your implementation of a change. How am I engaging with colleagues? You know, how am I giving that communication? How am I uniting? How are we reflecting together through the process? So this is what it looks like. These are these 3 behaviours. And these words, again, they're quite easy to say. Hopefully they're quite easy to understand, but they are really complex to get right and to do in a quality way. And they can be done in a superficial way. So I've been running this session a number of times now and talking to colleagues about how they do these things. And, one of the leaders said, I engage my staff, I send surveys out, I ask for their responses. But then when I asked, how many colleagues complete the survey? He's like, no one completes the survey. And then he reflected and thought, well, actually, the culture isn't quite right. They're scared to, give their views. And also they think that even if they fill it in, nothing's going to happen as a result. So you can do these in a superficial way. And also, you could go into a staff meeting and go, right, everyone, we're going to do this. Is that okay? And expect them to say yes. Again, is that true engagement where they feel they can shape the way it goes? So again, it's that conversation around quality. Do you do these behaviours, or does your organisation, support these behaviours? But are they done in a quality way? And how can they be up-leveled to make sure they're done in a quality way that really drives implementation? So this first one, then, engage. So this is where we engage people so they can shape what happens, but also provide the overall direction. And I'll just let you read that quote from the guidance report there. And I think that second sentence is really important here. So people ultimately value what they feel part of. And just think of your own experience. When someone has just told you what's going to happen, and you feel like it's been done to you, have you had that buy-in? Or actually, is it when you felt part of something, when you've been able to, make decisions and give your views? Is that where you felt more, engaged with it and wanting to be brought into that? And I think it would be the latter, and it certainly is for me. If I feel that I'm part of that I've got, some of my views that are thought into account, and obviously there's a bit of compromise maybe, but at least that compromise happens, or that conversation happens where I'm part of what's happening, rather than it being just told what's going to happen. So there's a few elements to this one. So it's engaging people so they have the potential to influence change. So that means we provide meaningful opportunities for people to share their perspectives, their ideas and their concerns. And this extends to students and families as well, not just our colleagues. Also, do we engage people in collaborative processes? So they create ways for people to work together, to bounce ideas off each other, to have insights, solve problems collaboratively. And structures like implementation teams can be really useful here. So, having those early adopters where there's some people that will trial it in their classes or their year groups or their subject, who then roll that out and support you with that. And if you have got any good ideas and things that you do effectively, please do put them in the chat. If you can type in the chat some good ideas, at the end we're going to share those ideas. So have you got any mechanisms at the moment that do work well? Do the surveys work well in your schools? Do you have focus groups? Do you have different groups? In my school we have a wellbeing team, and that team meets regularly to talk about what is supporting their well-being, but also what is negatively impacting on that. So please do put in the chat if you've got a good way that you're engaging colleagues, so they can feel that they have got part of that. Okay, so they've got that potential to influence the change, but also that collaborative process of problem solving. Another thing that we do in my school is we had a big arts week just before half term. But that was totally driven by our pupils who are in the Arts Council, along with the art governor, with some art parents who are interested in art. And they planned the theme of the Arts Week, which is going to be Paris Olympics. They brainstormed workshops, activities, trips, who they wanted to come in, and they totally had the influence of what was going to happen in that week. Obviously, as the leader, I then looked at their ideas and came back to them with which ones I'd chosen and why. So things on there they wanted that they couldn't have. Like we couldn't go to a trip to Paris, which they didn't suggest. But if they had, I would have to say, it doesn't work. But as a leader, you make the ultimate decision. But again, do you articulate why you can't utilize some of their ideas, and how you have included ideas that people have come up with? So engaging, it's their potential to influence that change. And and the Arts Council idea is just a little one, but Or if you do a lot of things like that in your school, that just shows that culture that you want to engage people. And then actually it's not just one person who's controlling everything and micromanaging everything. You know, there is that distributive leadership where people can feel like they've got power and empowerment to make changes and be involved in changes that are happening. But the other element of this one is to engage people through clear communication and the active guidance. So whilst we want these participatory ways of engaging people, we also need to actively guide and steer them. So you've got to communicate the direction of travel, explain your decisions, you know, why you've been able to include some of their ideas and why you haven't been able to include some, corralling those efforts, and preventing implementation being dragged off track. So that's engaged. So if you have got a good idea of how you do that, please type that in the chat. I'd really appreciate that. Then the next behavior that really drives that implementation is unite. And that's where we unite people around what is being implemented, how it will be implemented, and why it matters. Okay, so I'll let you read this quote from the guidance report. Okay, so poor implementation can be traced to those differing values, different understanding and practices among staff. And again, think about your role in your organisation. Is there really clear values that everybody signed up to? Is there a clear understanding of the core components, those core elements that need to be in place for an idea, for an implementation strategy, that everyone clearly understands what it's going to look like in their classrooms and what are the expectations in their classrooms, and also what we expect those practices to look like in their classrooms. Because if there is incoherence, it really creates that ambiguity. And it can mean colleagues can appear as though they're on the same page when they're not. So, you know, they'll nod in staff meetings and in inset days, but actually they'll go back to the classrooms and make no difference to their practice. And I sometimes call these sort of the speed camera teachers. So they'll do it when someone's watching, you know, or coming into their room, or you know, they're being observed. But when the door's closed and no one's there, they'll revert back to the behaviours they feel are right for them, and they won't have the actual buy-in to do what they're asked to do. So with this one, it's about, we need to unite the values. And sometimes if an approach we're trying to introduce doesn't align to people's values, they're less likely to implement it. And it can be really hard to shift people's values, but we've got to not ignore it. We've got to address that. So by exploring those common goals, acknowledging and addressing any concerns, you know, why doesn't it meet their values, and how can we unpick those concerns they've got? But the key thing here is discuss the risks. If we don't do this strategy, what are the risks going to be to the pupils in our schools, but also what are the benefits of taking the action that are really going to benefit our pupils? And that, again, that why, and that can really unite those values. But we also need to unite the knowledge and understanding. So while shared values lay that foundation for successful implementation, we also need to hear around what those values and principles look like in action. And this is moving beyond a shared vision to develop a shared understanding of what is being implemented, how it will be implemented, and why. And again, you know, far too often we told, right, you've got to do this and you've got to do it tomorrow, without actually knowing what it's going to look like in your classroom. So that's where that effective professional development needs to be in place, so people really clearly feel confident to know what it is they're going to do in their classroom, what it's going to look like, what are those key elements. And we really need to unite those skills and techniques, so that, again, the teachers have got the skills, they've got the practical techniques for that approach. And then also unite with that implementation process about how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how long we're going to give them before it needs to be in place, and you know, what are those key, you know, performance indicators we want to see along the journey. And it could be a 1 year journey, 2, 3, 4, 5, but so people are clearly on board with, you know, what's going to happen and when. There is a shift of language around this one. In the old report, it was called active ingredients, but in the new report, it's making sure that people know those core components of a strategy. And I sometimes use the toothpaste analogy here. So what's really important, again, is that bit of autonomy for teachers if it's going to align with their values. So it's with the toothpaste, you have to have fluoride. That's what's cleaned your teeth. But actually the colour, the flavour, the taste, the texture, if it's got sparkly bits in, that can all be different. So when you're introducing a process or a strategy, it's making clear they understand what are the core components that need to be in place so it's effective, but also what have they got autonomy to change for their students, for their subject, to make it really work for them in their classrooms. So an example for that is retrieval practice. You know, we've spent a lot of time working on retrieval practice in my school a number of years now, but it looks very different in reception than it does in year 2, than it does in year 6. It also looks very different in art than it does in PE, than it does in music, than it does in maths. So again, it's knowing what are the core elements of retrieval practice that need to be there. What are those, you know, core things that make it impactful, but then adapting it to the subject or the children you are working with. So again, is that made clear? Is that a strength of your school? And how do you do that? And if it isn't, how could you do that to really align and unite people about what is being implemented so they feel confident to make changes in their classroom? The third element is to reflect. And again, I'll let you read through that quote. And again, reflection really underpins an evidence-informed decision-making within implementation. So we need to be making sure we're reflecting, we're monitoring and adapting to improve that implementation. And there's 2 elements to this. So we need to reflect at a school level and an individual level. So there should be structured processes in the school that enable us to learn and adapt. So that monitoring needs to be there. But again, you need to unite people around why the monitoring is there. When we are putting in a change, that's a really high level of challenge for our colleagues, but we also need to give the same high level of support. So we can only do that if we are in classrooms, if we know what's going on, if we can see, you know, ask them what's happening, what are their challenges, what are their barriers, you know, so that we can help them, to support them, to address those. But also individuals need to adopt a reflective outlook. So they need to review and refine their own practice. And it's having that culture that, you know, we all want to get better, we all want to learn, not because what we're doing isn't good enough. Okay, we're amazing, you know, what we're doing, it can be a really high level, but actually we can always improve and we can always be getting better. And it's that process of ongoing learning that is really important to have that culture for. So in the workbook that's on the Padlet, there are some questions there to help you reflect on this personally or as an organisation. So for Unite, Engage, it's how can you involve teachers, TAs, parents and students to gain that comprehensive understanding of the current situation, identify those barriers to change. And if you've got some good ideas, please put them in the chat. How can you align everyone's understanding of the purpose, nature and process of these changes? And how can you implement these changes in a way that promotes that continuous learning and improvement? So that's the first recommendation. I've spent, you know, the longest time on that because that is the key thing. Those behaviours that drive implementation are vital to make sure it's carried out effectively. So recommendation 2 then, and this is where we need to attend to the contextual factors that influence implementation. So the behaviours are influenced by the context in which implementation happens. And these contextual factors can be enabling or constraining. So, you know, there are going to be contextual factors in your organisation that are either going to really enable it, sort of time to meet, but also there's going to be factors that constrain it in terms of time to meet, or availability of monitoring systems. So it's really important that it's, you know, we need to make sure that we've got these contextual factors in place so we don't get that frustration and we don't affect people's well-being because they're not able to do the job they want to do. For example, it's hard to unite understanding through implementation planning if there isn't time to meet and discuss those plans. Reflecting on implementation progress is tricky, and if there isn't a system in place to monitor implementation, then it's not going to have an effect. But again, these contextual factors, they wrap around the behaviours. We still need to be thinking about how we build in these behaviours while we're thinking about those contextual factors. So one of the contextual factors is the systems and structures we have in place. So we need to develop an infrastructure that supports that implementation. So, when we're planning on an implementation, we've identified a problem and we're looking at implementation, we need to think, is it actually feasible? Have we got the time to do this? And if the answer is no, then actually you need to stop there. Or if the answer is actually this is the priority, this is what we need to do, looking at the time it takes, and then creatively as the leader, making sure that time is built into, the professional development plans, the time that you have throughout the year, or how can you facilitate the time that's needed. The roles, have you got the right roles in place for people so people feel empowered to lead on that change? And are the logistics in place? Because it is easy, like it says in the quote there, to dream big. We can all have these grand ideas of what we want to happen. But actually, if we don't think then about the structural conditions that make it possible, these systems and structures and the logistics, then actually it's going to fail at the first hurdle, really. So it's really important we factor that in. And here's some examples of things that need to be thought about. So the school structure, so the timetables, the logistics and processes, the resources. Have we got the money to do this? Have we got the time? Have we got the policies? Have we got those roles? And again, these are vital to make sure that we're planning all of these and thinking about all of these when we're doing that prepare phase of the plan. And then the second part of this is, have we got those people who enable the change? Have we got people in place who are going to support, lead, and positively influence that implementation? And I'll just let you read that quote there. And again, it's thinking about our senior leaders behind this, because if they're not, then they're not going to put it into the timetable. They're not going to have the structures in place for this. Have we got implementation teams that can support with it to ensure that it's been driven in every subject in every area? Are there early adopters, people who are going to be really keen to get on board with this, who might want to trial it in their classes first to iron out any problems, so that then you can, when you roll it out, you've already addressed any concerns that might happen. And again, with those early adopters, you can go either way. Either someone who's going to really get on board with it and going to be champion of it, or you might choose actually the people who you think who may be the blockers of this. So if you get them on board early on, they trial it, you unblock any challenges they've got, and they become the people who are championing it and supporting it, rather than, you've got these people who are championing it, but the blockers really start to negatively impact the implementation. So how do we get those people on board to really help that implementation? So people, and knowing your stakeholders, knowing the people who are going to help to drive that implementation is vital. And again, that includes governors, it can include parents, it can include your staff as well. And then it's also about what is being implemented. So think about, is this approach evidence informed? There's no point in putting something in place if actually the evidence shows, even if it's implemented well, children will make -4 months progress. Well, why would you want to spend your time, effort, money on that if actually it's not going to work? So the Teaching and Learning Toolkit from the EEF is a really good resource here that helps you to think about, okay, if I implemented this strategy well, this is how many months progress the children would make, this is how much it would cost, this is what the research is saying. Is it right for our setting as well? So again, all too often we see things that the schools are doing and think, oh, that sounds great, I need to do that in my school. But actually, is it right for your school? Is it right for your children? You know your school best, so you need to think, is it right for us? Actually, is that our priority at the moment? Because if you're already focusing on one thing, don't bring in these other things that are good ideas that you see. Maybe wait, hold it on the back burner, start to learn about it, but wait till the time is right for your setting. And it might be the time that's right for the setting, or it might be, a strategy that's right for your setting, but making sure that it really fits your school and your pupils' needs. And also, is it feasible to implement? Is it actually something that is actually actionable for us to do, that we can achieve in our school? So again, with that one, it's, if an approach is well specified, it's going to be easier to implement than if it's vaguely defined. So are those core components there? Have you got the high quality professional development for this strategy? And actually, have we got the staff in place? And have we got the resources and the budget to pay for it? So thinking of what is being implemented is really important as well. And again, in the work booklet, there's some questions here to help you reflect on what's this looking like for you at the moment, you know? So it can help you to nod to what you know, what is the strength of your area, of your area at the moment in terms of contextual factors, and what might you need to look at or think about further when you're implementing another change. Okay. And then on their own, these factors can be hard to enact, and actually you need a structured process to help you to do that. So the third recommendation gives you a process that helps you to enable the behaviours and the contextual factors, and that's recommendation 3 of the report. And you may be aware of this process if you're aware of the last guidance report, but there are a few tweaks I'm going to talk you through now. So recommendation 3 is to adopt a structured but flexible implementation process. So this is what the process looks like. So in the past, on the left-hand side, you can see the old diagram, and there were detailed but linear steps. The strategies look like they remained in their phases, and it was a directive sequence, and the process didn't really respond to changes in the setting. So that's why we've made some changes. So now there are broader headings, and the guidance unpacks the detail behind those. And what's really clear in the new guidance report is that strategies can extend and overlap phases and be revisited. They don't just sit within their own phase and then you move on. Because actually, for example, with the explore phase, that will probably have to carry on throughout, because you need to be exploring and find and keep checking, is this the right priority and what's going on in my school at the moment? So really important that we have the understanding that they can extend, they overlap, and they can be revisited. We'd love to be in a world where, you know, we start at the top of the cycle and it goes all the way around really neatly, and the implementation is beautiful, but it isn't. It's messy, okay? It's complex, it's messy, so we might need to go back to different phases. And also that it's a flexible scaffold, and it should adapt to the topic and the setting. And what it's there for is to help you operationalize the behaviours and the contextual factors. Okay, but those behaviours and contextual factors have to be embedded throughout your implementation. So again, like it says, it doesn't occur in a neat linear fashion, even though we'd love it to. And so implementation really needs to be treated as an ongoing learning that adapts to the changing needs of the school, and that might be changing needs of priority, changing needs of the staffing, or you know, the changing needs. So again, in the old recommendation report, it was sort of a 3 sequenced that you sort of went through, but now it's a conversation, and it's a conversation with 2 key questions. So the first question is this right for our setting? So the first question we have to ask ourselves when we're going to make a change is this right for our setting? And the first thing we need to think is, what's the problem, and also what's already going on? So really identify the pupils' needs and their root causes. So what is it that's causing the biggest issue or problem for our pupils? You know, what is it that's going to be that biggest priority that's going to lead to the biggest change for their progress? But then also we really need to know what's currently happening in the area. And what influences that. So for example, if our phonic results are really low, we need to think, well, actually the problem is our children are not good at phonics, or they're not grasping the phonics. But then we need to know, well, what's happening at the moment in phonics? What's the teaching of phonics looking like now? Because actually, if we're going to make a change, it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of cost, a lot of time. We don't want to put something in place that isn't going to be better than what we're already doing. So it's so important we know what are the current practices in this area, and what are the real root causes of the problems for our pupils. And then the other flip side of this question is, what does the research suggest? So once we've identified a problem, we then look at the research and think about, well, what evidence shows us what works in other places, in other schools, that has addressed the issue we've got, and consider how well the approach addresses the problem and fits our setting. And the EEF have produced some resources to help with this. So the teacher and learning toolkit is there, all the guidance reports are there to support you with that, what the evidence shows. And also there's a really nice document about how to use evidence effectively, and what the pros and cons are of the evidence. But again, we really need to make sure we're building in the behaviours to these questions. It's not just one person doing it in their office on their own. We're engaging people in these questions. We're talking to colleagues, to pupils. We're looking at what's going on. We're uniting around, what the problem is and why it needs to change. And we're reflecting together, engaging together. So those behaviours have got to be built into these questions. And the second question is it actually feasible? Is it going to be feasible to implement this solution in our setting? So again, we think of two things here. What are the barriers and enablers to change in our setting? So what's going to help us? What's going to help us make these changes, and what's going to hinder us? So things there like time, existing skills or expertise, but then also how challenging is this approach to implement? So think about, what's the degree of complexity like? Have we got the can we access professional development to help us with this priority? And have we got the resources available to us to help with this priority as well? So the explore phase is now these two questions, and this tool helps you, and these questions help you to carry out the explore phase. And just like the old report, there is a tick sheet that gives you a nod of what an effective explore phase will look like. And it gives you some really key questions to make sure you've thought about those elements that need to be there in the explore phase, where you're really identifying what is the priority for our pupils, what are their needs, and again, drawing on that range of data and a range of perspectives. And I've put this onto the Padlet, so it's in one sheet with the different checklists for the phases on there. So that's the explore phase. So once you've explored and you're really clear that you know what the problem is and what your solution is going to be, what the evidence has shown, you then need to prepare to deliver that strategy. And again, that's got to be an effective prepare. So you need to plan and design, to plan that implementation. But again, not just one person on their own. We do it collaboratively. How are we going to monitor that implementation and uniting on why that monitoring is important? And then also practically preparing, so selecting that strategy. And what's really nice in the back of the guidance report is there's a big table with lots and lots of different implementation strategies on there. So once you've identified your priority and your solution, you can then look at all the strategies and pick which is the most effective strategy for you. And obviously it's got to include effective professional development, and our guidance report on professional development can really help you to get the most out of your professional development. It's going to, again, make a difference in the classrooms. You've got to build those systems and structures and have that clear communication. So that's the prepare phase. And again, there's some really nice questions there to help you reflect on what an effective prepare phase should look like. And then we have our deliver phase. And this is a really nice metaphor, I think, about the deliver phase. So, with curling. So when they're curling, they're obviously trying to get the stone, the sort of big circle thing in the middle, down the closest to a specific spot. Okay. But when they're doing curling, they don't just deliver it, close their eyes and hope for the best, and then just open their eyes at the end and see what's happened. The person who's delivering it absolutely keeps their laser eye on that stone to make sure it's going in the right direction. They monitor it really closely, but then there's also a team around them that's improving the travel, the direction of travel, constantly working with the brush to really brush and get it going the right way. So, it's that kind of thing. As a leader, you can't just do a one-off training session or a one-off inset day and then magically it's going to change all the behaviours in your school. Okay, so it's thinking about when we deliver something, it's that ongoing professional development, that ongoing monitoring that is really going to support implementation, because you can make improvements and adaptations as that implementation is happening to support colleagues. So when delivery is framed as a learning process, monitoring implementation becomes an essential tool in identifying and acting on those implementation problems. So again, we need to unite people around the fact that monitoring is there to give that high level of support. It's not about trying to hit anyone over the head or tell them off for doing it wrong. It's a learning process together. We need to learn on, we're putting this strategy in. We need to learn if it's working for us, what are the challenges and how we can address those. And again, what I really love about this new report is that element of well-being and thinking of staff well-being. And when we're delivering something, when we're asking people to make a change and use a new strategy, that level of support and encouragement needs to be really high. So we need to support staff during that initial implementation effort, so giving them that high quality professional development to start off with. We need to provide those regular prompts that support, those reminders, you know, sharing that good practice, you know, enabling them to go and see that good practice, and also reinforcing that professional development. So it's an ongoing professional development. Again, coaching is really supportive here. And again, letting people go in and watch each other and observe each other and see that good practice. My school's an English hub. We do a lot of support for schools on phonics and early reading, and we have a number of events, you know, every half term, where we have lots of teachers and leaders coming to watch phonics in our school. But again, we don't just send them into the lessons on their own. What's really key when we are sharing that good practice, or going to observe others, is that we have a leader who can narrate what's happening and why that decision's been made, why that teacher's doing that. So when we're doing an English hub event or a champion school event, my English leader wears a microphone, and the colleagues that are with her have earpieces in, and when they're watching the phonics and the reading lessons, you know, she's narrating and talking through what it is that teacher's doing and why they're doing it and how it builds into that sequence of learning. So it's really important that, you know, we give them that really effective ongoing professional development that really unpicks why decisions have been made and why they're helpful and why they're supporting the pupils. So really reinforcing that professional development. Like we have to reinforce the learning for pupils, it's remembering that adult learners need the same. They need that retrieval practice, they need that ongoing support, they need that direct instruction, that clear modelling that really helps them to understand what it is, what are those core components and what they can look like in their classroom. But also that monitoring and improving is really important. So using that monitoring data to improve that implementation, gathering that feedback and tailoring the further implementation based on what you're seeing the challenges are, so we can remove those. I think the area we find when we're working with schools where people don't do this as well is with pupil premium reports and strategies. Very often the head teacher will say to somebody, oh, you know, this is your, you know, you're in charge of pupil premium, off you go. And that teacher will sit in their office, they'll explore what they think is the problem, they'll write the strategy, they'll put it on the website so they're compliant, so they tick the box. But actually, no one knows it exists. No one knows what those actions are. No one knows what their role is in that. So there's no way it's going to make a difference to the disadvantaged pupils in our schools. And it also doesn't link in with their implementation plans. So it's really important that, you know, when we're delivering something, we've done that engagement and people understand why we're doing it, what the strategy is, how it links in with our improvement of our school and our vision of our school, so we can, again, get that real buy-in. And again, there's some nice questions to help you reflect as the leader, you know, are you doing an effective delivery phase? So is delivery of the approach treated as a process of ongoing learning and improvement? Are systems in place to monitor implementation, identify those barriers, enablers, and make those improvements? Do staff feel supported by the actions of the leadership? Yeah, so it's about feeling supported rather than being, you know, feeling like it's blame or judgmental, and they feel like they're being done with rather than being done to. And is initial professional development being reinforced by follow-on support, such as that high-quality feedback for colleagues, those prompts and those reminders? And then the final stage in the structure is sustain, because again, how much effort goes into something? We put all our effort into exploring, preparing, delivering something, but then we move on to something else. So all the effort we put in goes to the wayside because everyone just reverts back to their old habits in that area and then puts their eye onto the next strategy or the next thing. So again, when we're sustaining, we need to plan for that from the inset when we start to prepare. We need to think about it right from the beginning. How are we going to sustain this? Is it a sustainable strategy that is going to live on after, you know, we've had that real input of implementation? So those seeds for sustainability need to be sown throughout the implementation process. So this means adopting the right implementation strategies and ensuring they include the behaviours and contextual factors. So again, You know, we need to think about how we're going to build in those behaviours, so that engage, unite and reflect throughout the sustain phase, and how we're going to get the systems and structures and contextual factors right so it can continue, you know, when we move on to something else. And again, you sort of come to a crossroads where you need to think, well, actually, are we going to sustain this? You know, we've put it in place, we've delivered it. Is it having the impact we want? Is it still the priority of our children? So we need to think, are we going to sustain it? Or actually, it's not having the impact we want. It's not it's not feasible, or it's not actually the priority anymore. We may need to de-implement it. And that can be really hard as a leader. If you put all your effort into it, into something for a while, to then think, oh, actually, we're going to stop something, can be really tricky. But if it is an ineffective practice, if it isn't having that impact, we do need to de-implement it. But again, with the proviso, have you given it enough time? So, you know, it's not going to be a quick fix. So, you know, it might be a 1, 2 or 3 years actually before you start seeing that progress. So it's that being brave to say, we're going to keep going with this because it's showing good signs of impact. So we need to keep going. Or actually, it might be that it can work, but we're still doing an ineffective practice over here. And actually, that's what we need to de-implement to make room for this more effective strategy to really flourish. So again, it's that sort of crossroads of thinking, are we going to sustain it? Are we going to upscale it? Or actually, are we going to de-implement this strategy or something else to make more room for that? And again, there's a nice tool in the guidance report that walks you through and helps you when you come to this sustain phase to think about your decision making here. And again, there's some questions and reflection questions to help with that. So as new priorities emerge, is sufficient support in place to protect and maintain it? Do leaders continue to acknowledge and support those good implementation practices? Are we still sharing that good practice? Are a range of staff involved so we don't over rely on individuals? Because again, if it's just one person driving it and they leave the school, then actually is it all just going to fall down? How are we going to sustain that? What is our succession plan so that can keep being driven? You know, are there teams or are there people who could shadow that person so it doesn't just all go by the wayside? And again, before deciding on whether to continue, scale up or stop an approach, have we reviewed the previous implementation efforts and outcomes so far? Do we really clearly know if it is having an impact and why it is or why it isn't? Okay. So that is the new guidance report. It's these 3 recommendations. There's a really nice poster with all the guidance reports that you can download, and it's got the 3 recommendations and the summary of what are those key elements of each of those. But what I really love is that behaviours are absolutely driving this process, and they're embedded, they've got to be built into all of our practices. So again, in the workbook, there's some questions to help you to reflect on this, on the structure on this recommendation 3. So do you have sufficient support to maintain the implementation effort as new priorities emerge? Our leaders continue to acknowledge the support, and like we said, before making decisions, have the previous efforts been thoroughly reviewed? So just to summarise them before I finish the session, and if you have got any questions, please do put them in the chat, or if you've got any good practice in any of these areas, then please do share that. So to summarise, in 2017, the old report was out and that had 6 recommendations. There are now 3 recommendations, and all 6 of the old recommendations are now built into just the recommendation 3 of the new guidance report, and they've got tweaks to them, okay, with that structure. So these are the plots and the subplots. So the main plot is that the old guidance focused on how to do implementation. So it gave us a structure of how to do it. But the updated report really does show us how to do that in a quality way where we're bringing people with us, okay? And we're doing it in a, you know, we're not just doing it in a superficial way. We're not just engaging with that process in a superficial way. We think about, are we doing each of those phases in a quality way through adopting those behaviours and thinking about those contextual factors? It's that real conversation around the quality of our implementation. And then the subplots are implementation in school is complex and dynamic. If you've ever tried to lead anything in a school, you will know that, okay, that complexity. But it's got to be seen as a process of ongoing inquiry from the leaders who are leading it, but also from your colleagues, and getting that culture that we are all on this journey where we want to learn and we want to do our best. It's that social nature which I absolutely love of this report. We've got to think about the people that we're bringing with us and how we bring those with us and how we protect their well-being as we are implementing a new change. So that high level of support alongside that high level of challenge, but also they've got to be supported by those systems and structures that enable that change. And obviously the key element is got to be evidence informed. Okay, it's got to be evidence of what's going on in your school. What are the current practices? What are my priorities? What are my problems for my pupils? What's the priority that's really going to make a difference for them? And what's the external evidence? What's the research telling me about what is going to help them with that main area of priority and need for my pupils? And putting those two together really gets that evidence-informed practice that is going to make a big difference for the pupils in our schools. And again, that can help us to think about what we're implemented, but also how we're going to implement that. So I hope you found this session useful. And I hope it's giving you that time to reflect on your current practice and think about, which of those recommendations are you strong on, which may you need to do a few tweaks to or develop further. And you can read, obviously, go into more depth in the guidance report because it gives you case studies, it gives you ideas, it gives you resources to help you with each of those recommendations. We have got a newsletter that comes out each half term for Staffordshire Research School. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to the sign-up sheet there. I've got 14 evidence leads who work with me who are experts in different areas, and they write articles, they write blogs of case studies of how they're putting this research into practice in their schools, what it looks like for them in their setting and what it can look like for you in your setting, and giving you some good ideas. So please do sign up for that. We also have podcasts, we have a YouTube channel, we're on TikTok. So please, and on Instagram, so please do find us on those channels where we do share, how can I actually put this in place in my school? What can it look like for me as a leader? But thank you so much for your time. I do hope you found that useful. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. So thank you.